Today we received the second half of our bare root tree order. These will be all the trees planted by the city this year. They'll be planted in parks and along streets in the public right-of-way. These bare root trees that we installed today in our new gravel bed system. Gravel bed is a way of holding the trees and watering them in a central location through the first summer of their life, and then we'll plant them in the fall in their final location. Actually, this project was first something I suggested when I first took this job in July of last year. This is a system that's made popular by Gary Johnson, the extension forester at the University of Minnesota. So I suggested this in my second week of work, and it was made possible in part through a very generous donation by the Lions Club. So we put 95 in today, and we've now got a total of 214 bare root trees in there with 20 different species. And all of those trees will be planted this year in the fall, which is going to be about double what we've planted historically. So the gravel bed is about 20 inches of pea gravel with 10% sand in it, and the trees are placed in there and buried up to about 8 inches on the stem. And then they receive water 4 times a day from an automatic sprinkler system. They'll develop a really thick fibrous root system which will aid in their transplant success. Yeah, one of the biggest goals in Columbia Heights Forestry is going to be to build the diversity of the community forest. Diversity, as we've learned through a couple of very painful episodes, first Dutch elm disease and now emerald ash borer, is really the only true defense against introduced pathogens. So when the Dutch elm fungus was introduced from Europe in the 70s, it totally remade our public forest, and the emerald ash borer is currently doing the same. So our goal is to have a very diverse forest in which a given species doesn't make up more than 10%. So if a new pathogen or insect was introduced, you can never lose more than 10% of your public forest in any one go. If anybody's interested in learning more about the gravel bed or planting trees or needs advice on their own trees, you can contact me at Public Works.